Hello and good morning. Today is Friday, October 23rd, Friday of week 3, and I want to thank you for tuning in to this week's weekly video. Just a couple quick announcements as we move forward. I want to remind you all that we will continue to have weekly assignments as we've had the past few weeks, moving right through week 7. Week 8, we will not have a new weekly assignment. That's Thanksgiving week. We're giving you Thanksgiving week off for ES1. We'll come back week 9, have our final assignment of the quarter, and then week 10, you'll have an opportunity to make up one assignment that you may have missed or for which you received an unsatisfactory grade. We'll give you more details about how to do that during week 10 as we get a little closer to the end of the quarter. For now, though, we're sort of in the middle of the quarter, and so we're going to be continuing on the track we've been continuing on with weekly videos, weekly assignments, activities, solo questions, and pod questions. I understand that many of you have been doing really well with this and that you've been enjoying getting to know some of your fellow pod members and talking about the materials with them. That's great. I also know that some questions have come up in recent weeks, and in our TA meetings over the past couple weeks, which we have each week on Thursdays, we've discussed some concepts that seemed like maybe they could stand to be a little bit more fleshed out or better explained. And so I want to take the next few minutes of this weekly video today to do that for just a few of these concepts that have come up that are important and that some of the readings and activities have focused on as we've gone through these first few weeks of the quarter. The first of these concepts I'd like to briefly discuss this morning and flesh out, explain to you maybe a little bit better than you've had explained to you already this quarter, is the concept of the Anthropocene. The Anthropocene is a geologic epoch. What's an epoch? An epoch is one of the major divisions of geologic time as described in the geologic timescale that's been constructed and developed by geological scientists over the past couple centuries. The geological timescale is divided into major phases that have particular characteristics within the phase, and then that often have boundaries in between the phase defined by changes or events in the fossil record that we can see from looking at rocks that are buried underground or that may become exposed on the surface. The geological timescale has 4 major types of time phases. The longest one is the eon, covering vast amounts of time. There are eras covering somewhat shorter amounts of time, periods nested within the eras, and then epochs or epochs. Epochs over the last many millions of years have actually averaged about a couple million years each. So for example, the Pleistocene epoch lasted for about 2.5 million years, from about 2.5 million years ago to about 11 or 12,000 years ago, according to the current geological time scale. That's the average period of an epoch. The Holocene epoch, which is on the geological timescale marked at about 11 or 12,000 years ago until very close to the present, was considered the period that we were in until relatively recently. More recently, geologists have identified that we seem to have passed into a new phase, a new epoch, called the Anthropocene. The Anthropocene, unlike the geological phases that came before it, is defined by human action, by humans being the dominant force changing the geology and the climate and the biology of planet Earth. All of these changes over time will be laid down in evidence, in fossil evidence, in the rocks that accumulate during this period, and that people that are around in the future, long in the future, will be able to look back and study based on the geologic layers, the rocks, the sediments that are getting laid down today. So the Anthropocene is actually a geologic concept, but it's also a historical and ecological and climatic concept. The reasons for that is that because the Anthropocene is underway right now, because it's very recent in its origin, and because it involves a period of very dramatic, very rapid change, we are actually experiencing the changes of the Anthropocene in real time, in very short time scales that are sort of unusual in the geologic record. Of course, you may know that if you go back in the geologic record, you can see sharp breaks in the fossil record. For example, the extraterrestrial impact, the asteroid impact that wiped out all but the avian dinosaurs about 66 million years ago, was previously believed to have had long-term consequences that resulted in the gradual extinction of many of those species. Now we know, based on current evidence, that actually many of those species went extinct very quickly, within hours or days after that initial extraterrestrial impact. And so that was a really rapid, incredibly rapid, sharp break in the fossil record. Today, the Anthropocene is also unfolding in very quickly on short timescales. Some say that we should think of the Anthropocene as beginning around 6,000 years or so with the onset of large-scale sedentary agriculture in the Middle East and some other regions. Others say that the Anthropocene really began around the time of European colonization and globalization, 400 or 500 years ago. Others point to the Industrial Revolution of the 18th and 19th centuries as a moment when things really changed, when modernity really got underway, and when large-scale, global-scale changes to Earth systems really began on a different scale than they had begun before. Still others point to the period beginning around World War II, with the detonation of the first atomic bombs, but also with a phase that followed World War II called the Great Acceleration. The Great Acceleration, this period since World War II of about one human lifetime, leading up till now, is the period in which human societies have grown dramatically at an exponential rate, greatly outpacing their previous impacts on Earth systems in terms of things like population growth, economic growth, carbon emissions, habitat loss, and other sorts of indicators that you could look at to describe these changes. So the Anthropocene is a geologic concept that's actually extremely relevant to us today because it's also a historical, ecological, and climatic context, and it is in fact the reality in which we live. Today, for the first time in human history and in the history of the Earth, although people have had impacts for a very long time on ecosystems in which they live, now humans have become a dominant force in shaping the land, the living things on this planet, the cryosphere, the ice, the oceans, and the climate in ways that are so dramatic and so unprecedented that the traces of these will be left in the fossil record, in rocks on the Earth's surface for millions and millions of years to come. That is the phase we are living in now. That is the Anthropocene. Hi again, folks. I had to briefly stop my recording there, so this week's weekly video will be broken up into two parts, and this will be part two. So I just discussed the Anthropocene as one of the key concepts that we've been working with these past several weeks that came up in your readings and that warranted some further discussion and clarification. Let's now talk about another one, biological diversity, or biodiversity for short. Biodiversity refers to the entire diversity of life on this planet, at all scales and all levels of organization, from genes to species to ecosystems, and in different kinds of ecosystems and places around the world. The Earth is the only planet that we know of yet that has a biosphere, that has living things. We're likely probably to find more in the future, but as of now, Earth is the only planet that we know for sure has life. It's also the only planet, as a result, that we know that has biological diversity, or biodiversity. Biodiversity can be measured in many ways, but I think that all scientists agree that over time, the diversity of life on Earth has increased dramatically over long periods of time to create the spectacular array of living things that we see today. There have also been moments over the long span of Earth history, about 4.5 billion years in fact, when biodiversity, which had grown in the previous period, was cut down or reduced very rapidly in what we now call a mass extinction. A general kind of rule is to say that a mass extinction occurs when about 50% of species on Earth, or in one of Earth's major realms, like the terrestrial realm or the marine realm, all go extinct at around the same time over a very short period of time. What does a very short period of time mean? It really depends. In some mass extinctions, the very short period of time actually took place over tens of thousands of years. In others, like the mass extinction that eliminated all but the avian dinosaurs 66 million years ago, as I just said in the previous part one of this video, that may have occurred over an incredibly short period of time of hours, days, or weeks. We are currently in what many scientists consider to be the sixth mass extinction in the history of Earth. There have been 5 previously, and now we are undergoing a 6th. What does that actually mean? Well, it means different things depending on how you look at it. So over the past 30 or 40,000 years, people have moved into different areas of the world at an increasingly rapid rate. And as people have moved into different areas, going back 30 or 40 or even 50,000 years in places like Australia, they've caused dramatic ecological changes that in many cases have resulted in the loss of many species. People moved into the Americas probably about 15,000 years ago, based on what we know from the archaeological record today. And that wave of immigrants into North America, of people coming from Asia into North America, also caused a wave of extinctions, including the loss of most of the Pleistocene mammalian megafauna, so the large mammals that existed in North America during the Pleistocene, many of which went extinct between about 15,000 and 9,000 years ago. Another wave of extinctions happened during the era of European colonization and exploration, particularly on islands in the Atlantic, Indian, and Pacific Oceans. Now we are also undergoing a period of accelerated change and accelerated species declines and loss. This has happened at a greater rate over the past 50 years than it probably has happened at any time previously during that short period of time since the extinction of the non-avian dinosaurs 66 million years ago. So this period of the last 50 years or 60 years, that great acceleration that I talked about in part one of this video, has also had a major impact on life on Earth and on other species that share this planet with us, leading to widespread species declines, habitat loss, overexploitation of other species in some circumstances, and a number of extinctions as well. Now, biodiversity is important for many reasons. Other species provide us with many of the things that we need to live, from food to eat, to clean water to drink, and to use on our crops, for pollination of our crops, and all kinds of other ecological services, including things like protecting us from natural disasters and providing us with building materials and a variety of other things, right? And so biodiversity is incredibly important, not only for itself, on its own terms, inherently important, intrinsically important even, but also important for human societies and for the things that we all do on a daily basis. We're going to talk a little bit more about biodiversity over the next week as we talk about this mass extinction. What I want to point to now, though, is the importance of biodiversity in shaping the disease environment in which people live. We're accustomed to thinking of diseases, particularly in this country and in many Western societies, as being medical problems, the germ theory of disease, thinking of diseases as being things that come from the outside, that attack us, and that we need to fend off using targeted treatments. This is the way that we think of most diseases in our society today. However, anyone who has studied public health beyond the narrowly medical aspects of disease knows that diseases exist within an environment, and that environments create conditions under which people in general, or specific people in society, may be more or less vulnerable to the effects of pathogens, of diseases that may attack us, that may attack our systems. About 60% of the pathogens that afflict humans, 60%, are also shared with some other animal. Oftentimes with a mammal, many of which are in the orders of carnivores or ungulates, or bats, for example, which is believed to be the source of the current coronavirus pandemic. The important thing about this is that if you understand that we share many of the dangerous pathogens that affect us with other animals that exist in the environment, then the way we treat those other animals affects the disease environment in which we live. The way we treat other creatures, and including the way we treat and manage their habitats, shapes the disease environment, increasing or reducing the risk that diseases may be transmitted to us. This is incredibly important. It relates to articles you've read in recent weeks, but it's important because in an era of widespread ecological change, habitat loss, and species declines, we are creating conditions that are much more amenable, that are much more beneficial, I guess you could say, for some pathogens, in the sense that it enables them to spread more easily, to potentially jump from one species to another, which is a rare event in nature, but we're making it more likely because of the way that we treat other animals, bringing them closely together, moving them around from place to place, eliminating their habitats, forcing them into new areas. And all of these things together shape the disease environment in ways that are making pandemics of the kind that we're currently experiencing with COVID-19 more likely in the future. So biodiversity has a long history. It's changed over time and increased over time. It's been knocked down during several phases, including 5 mass extinctions. We are currently in a mass extinction. But even more importantly, just for us right now, for the situation we're in, it is crucial to recognize that beyond the narrowly medical framing of a disease like COVID-19 caused by the SARS-CoV-2 virus, the conditions under which pandemics like this are made more likely are the exact conditions that we are creating by our actions in many environments today. To conserve biological diversity is in many ways to protect ourselves. The third concept I want to discuss briefly today is the concept of social trust, sometimes also called social solidarity. Social solidarity is measured in many ways. Essentially, it's the extent to which people trust the others around them and the institutions of their society, such as universities, scientific institutions, government agencies, churches, corporations, the degree of trust that people have in these institutions, that these institutions are working on their behalf, that they're making the world better, and that they're looking out for people in society, including themselves. So that's sort of social trust and social solidarity. Social trust tends to be high when people feel like society is fair, like their leaders are looking out for them, or when they have a common or perceived goal, identity, or purpose. That's when social trust is high. In the United States, social trust was high following World War II for many people, not for all. Certainly not for all. There were many people who were left out of that consensus, including people of color, people from poor communities, immigrants, and many others. And so social solidarity was high for some groups following World War II, but not for all. If you look today around the world, the level of social trust or social solidarity varies significantly from country to country. Countries that have governments with a reputation and history of corruption, for example, tend to have low social solidarity. Countries that have well-functioning governments, well-functioning and regulated institutions, where people feel like they have a common identity, goal, or purpose, and where their leaders and their institutions are looking out for them, tend to have much higher levels of social trust and solidarity. In the United States, following this post-World War II period of high social trust and social solidarity, these things began to decline. Many people cite the early 1970s, the time of the Vietnam War, and also the Watergate scandal during the Nixon administration, as a watershed moment when social trust and social solidarity began to decline for many complex reasons, not just those, but began to decline in American society. And it has been on the decline ever since. We can measure this in many ways. For example, just people's participation in civic institutions. People tend to volunteer less than they used to in many cases. They go to church less. They respond to surveys that they have less faith in institutions like universities, unfortunately, that they have less faith in government to do the right thing. And this has been a long-term trend in our society over about the last 50 years or so. There are suggestions that this may be starting to change. We'll start to see that with the electoral politics of the next several weeks and what happens after that, and whether or not people are now looking for more social solidarity and rebuilding some of our institutions that have declined or been damaged in recent years. Social solidarity is particularly important because it shapes our ability to solve common problems. When social solidarity is low, when institutions are weak or untrusted, people tend to have less of an ability to come together to solve difficult problems. When social solidarity increases, when social trust increases, when people have more faith in institutions, when they invest in institutions, when they feel like they're all in this together, and they feel like the structures of society are working on their side, then it makes it much easier to solve difficult problems. Think of the way that people mobilized for World War II in this country. A high level of social solidarity, a common purpose, a general trust in institutions, and a willingness to all work on the same team, at least among many groups in society. That was considered kind of the golden age in the United States of social trust and social solidarity. Many people argue that today, given the problems that we face in this country, and there are so many across the board, but just take climate change, for example. Given the problem of climate change, what we really need to do to solve climate change is not just to buy more electric cars or to produce more solar panels. What we need is a greater level of social trust and solidarity so that people feel like they can invest in and participate in and get behind the kinds of institutions that can make broad-scale systemic changes throughout society that improve everyone's life while addressing these pressing problems, instead of just ignoring it or people going it on their own because they feel like they can't trust institutions to work on their behalf. So again, social trust and solidarity are incredibly important. They vary across countries. They vary within countries over time. And they're particularly important for tackling large-scale problems that people need to come together to solve. These are just a few insights and concepts from recent week's assignments. Over the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be doing more of this, talking about key concepts, fleshing them out, and responding to the feedback that I get from my TAs about things that are working, things that aren't working, and about particular areas that we need to focus on that warrant more explanation. If you have questions, please speak to your TA. Please let them know. Please come to office hours. Please come to my office hours. Please let me know. And the more of that feedback we get, the better we'll be able to communicate with you through email, during your discussion sections, and during these weekly videos over the coming weeks. Thanks so much for all your hard work. Good luck with week 4 assignment, and I'll be seeing you shortly, either in office hours or in another video just like this 1 week from now.